On my 35th birthday, my dad turned to me in front of everyone I had ever known, looked straight into my eyes, and screamed those 5 words. "You are dead to me." The entire block party, illuminated by cheap string lights and the heavy scent of barbecue smoke, went dead silent. I did not cry. I did not scream back. Something inside me simply shattered, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. The next morning, I packed my bags, withdrew every single cent of my funds, and left my golden child sister to sink to the bottom of the ocean she created. 2 weeks later, my family found out the hard way that when you declare a forensic accountant dead to you, her signature dies too. Welcome to the story of how my family tried to bury me under $500,000 of debt, and how I let the paperwork be my shovel. If you know what it feels like to be the invisible child, drop a comment with the word invisible right now, because this one is for you. My name is Serafina. I am 35 years old, and I spend my life tracing the invisible lines of corporate greed. I am a corporate compliance auditor. I walk into glass skyscrapers, sit in perfectly temperature-controlled boardrooms, and I find the millions of dollars that executives try to hide. I am very good at my job. But for the longest time, the sharpest instincts I possessed completely failed me when it came to my own blood. I grew up in a town where legacy meant everything. My parents, Vaughn and Loretta, own Vaughn and Daughters Legacy Press. It is a massive, groaning commercial printing facility that has been in our family for 3 generations. The air inside that building always smells like ozone, hot metal, and industrial ink. It is a smell that gets under your fingernails and never really washes out. For my entire life, that press was the absolute center of my parents' universe. Everything else, including me, was just an accessory. I left the town when I was 18 to get my degree in accounting, and I built a quiet, successful life in the city, about a 45-minute drive away. But leaving did not mean I was free. Every single Sunday, like clockwork, I made the drive back to sit in the cramped, poorly lit back office of the press to do their bookkeeping. I balanced their ledgers. I filed their complex commercial tax returns. I caught vendor billing errors that saved them thousands. And I did it all for absolutely free. My mother called it pitching in for the legacy. I called it the tax I had to pay just to be allowed to exist in their orbit. The star of that orbit was my younger sister, Calliope. Calliope is 3 years younger than me, but she has always taken up 10 times the space. While I was born practical and quiet, Calliope was born loud, demanding, and perfectly crafted for my parents' adoration. She was the golden child. When she graduated with a communications degree that took her 6 years to finish, my dad immediately gave her the title of Director of Operations at the press. He ordered custom embroidered jackets with her name on them. She gets a company car, a corner office that used to be a storage room, and a salary she absolutely does not earn. The funniest part? Calliope cannot read a basic balance sheet if her life depended on it. She talks in corporate buzzwords she hears on podcasts, using phrases like synergizing our print paradigms, while the actual machinery breaks down and the bills pile up. I always accepted my role as the invisible safety net. I was the one they called when the numbers were red, and she was the one they cheered for when the machines were running. But the foundation of my patience began cracking a few months ago. I was sitting in my sterile, quiet apartment in the city, enjoying a rare Tuesday evening off. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was not a text from my mother demanding I come fix a printer. It was an automated alert from my credit monitoring service. I opened the email, my auditor brain instantly kicking into gear. Someone had just attempted to open a high-tier corporate credit card using my social security number, my legal name, and my home address. The application was flagged and blocked because, being the paranoid financial expert I am, I had placed a hard freeze on my credit profile 8 months prior. I stared at the screen. The IP address of the application originated from the zip code of my parents' printing press. My heart did not race. It slowed down. In my line of work, you do not panic when you find a discrepancy. You follow the thread. Calliope had tried to pull my credit. She had tried to forge my financial identity to secure a line of credit I knew nothing about. And she failed only because I am smarter than her. As I sat there in the dark, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mother. Her name glowed on the screen, and I knew before I answered that the family drama was about to escalate into a full-blown war. What are you supposed to do when the people who gave you life try to steal your future? I let the phone ring 4 times before I finally picked it up. My mother's voice flowed through the speaker, dripping with that forced, sugary sweetness she only uses when she is about to trap me in a guilt trip. Serafina, honey, Loretta cooed. Your father is just so stressed. His blood pressure is through the roof. We need the whole family together this weekend. Sunday dinner. Oh, and bring your legal seal, would you? We have some routine paperwork to tidy up for the business. Routine paperwork. That phrase tasted like ash in my mouth. I knew exactly what she meant, and I knew exactly why Calliope had tried to illegally pull my credit just hours before. The business was bleeding again. I agreed to come, keeping my voice as flat and emotionless as a freshly printed page. I hung up the phone and leaned back on my couch, letting the memories wash over me. If you want to understand why my family felt so entitled to my signature, you have to walk through the museum of pain they built for me over 35 years. The exhibits are perfectly preserved in my mind. Exhibit A, the high school grade book. I was a straight-A student. I spent my weekends studying advanced calculus and economics. When I brought home my final report card senior year, pristine and perfect, my father barely glanced at it. He grunted, slid it across the kitchen table, and went back to reading the sports section. 2 weeks later, Calliope managed to scrape a C- in basic algebra, avoiding summer school. My parents threw a barbecue and bought her a brand new convertible as a reward for her immense perseverance. I remember standing on the porch, watching her rev the engine, realizing that my excellence was an expectation, but her mediocrity was a miracle to be celebrated. Exhibit B, the Ring of Keys. When I was 10 years old, my father called me into his office. He handed me a heavy brass ring holding 6 jagged keys. You are responsible now, Serafina, he told me, his chest puffed out with pride. He did not give me a title. He did not give me a jacket. He gave me the job of waking up at 5 in the morning on Saturdays, riding my bicycle in the freezing cold, and unlocking the massive steel doors of the press so the early shift workers could get in. I was the child kneeling on the oily concrete floor, counting the petty cash drawer, my hands stained with black ink. Calliope never touched a key. When I asked my mother why Calliope did not have to help, she just laughed, patted my cheek, and said, Calliope is the face of the family, sweetie. You are the hands. Someone has to do the dirty work. But the grand centerpiece of my Museum of Pain, Exhibit C, happened exactly 2 years ago. The commercial printing industry took a massive hit. The press lost 3 major local contracts, and the business accounts were suddenly drowning in red ink. The bank threatened to pull their operating line of credit. My father stopped sleeping. He paced the house like a trapped animal. My mother called me crying every single day. The bank was willing to extend an $80,000 lifeline, but only if someone with an impeccable credit score and a high verifiable income co-signed the guarantee. They did not ask me. They expected me. I drove out to the town, sat in that ink-stained office, and I did what the invisible daughter always does. I saved them. But because I am an auditor, I did not do it blindly. I had my own lawyer, Paul, draft the agreement. My guarantee was strictly capped at $80,000. It had a fixed 2-year term, maturing right around the time of my 35th birthday. The collateral was explicitly tied to the printing press equipment, not my personal apartment, not my retirement accounts. I read every single line of that contract. I kept a certified copy in a fireproof safe in my apartment. When my mother saw me carefully punching holes in the documents to put in my binder, she looked at me with deep, theatrical disgust. You keep receipts on your own family, Serafina? She spat, shaking her head. That is just cold. I did not answer her then. I just snapped the binder ring shut. In my profession, the people who get financially slaughtered are always the ones who trusted that they would never need the receipts. And now, 2 years later, that $80,000 lifeline was coming to an end. The timing was not a coincidence. The credit alert, the sudden demand for my legal seal, the Sunday dinner. The trap was being set. They had used my name to keep their ship afloat for 24 months, and instead of fixing the holes in the hull, they had let Calliope drill new ones. I spent the rest of the week preparing. I did not confront them over the phone. I did not mention the blocked credit inquiry. I let them believe I was still the compliant, quiet accountant who would show up and stamp whatever paper they slid across the pot roast. But the Serafina who was driving back to that small town on Sunday was not the obedient daughter anymore. I was an auditor walking into a crime scene, and I was going to let them hand me the murder weapon. What happens when the scapegoat decides to stop carrying the sins of the family? You are about to find out. The drive to my parents' house always felt like traveling backward in time. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the smell of my mother's famous pot roast was already drifting through the air, heavy and suffocating. I walked through the front door and was immediately greeted by the suffocating theater of a happy family. My father, Vaughn, was wearing his good Sunday shirt. He clapped me on the shoulder, a little too hard, a little too desperately. My mother, Loretta, rushed over to kiss my cheek, leaving a smear of cheap lipstick. And there, sitting at the dining room table with her feet propped on a chair, was Calliope. She was wearing a designer silk blouse that cost more than a press operator's weekly paycheck. She gave me a lazy wave, her eyes glued to her phone screen. "Serafina, you brought your seal, right?" Calliope asked, not even looking up. "No, hello, no, how are you?" Just straight to the transaction. "I have my bag," I replied neutrally, pulling out a chair. Dinner was a masterclass in manipulation. My father talked loudly about the legacy of the press, how his grandfather built it from a single machine, how the name Vaughn meant something in this county. He poured wine, laughed too loudly, and avoided making eye contact with me. My mother kept piling food onto my plate, asking me empty questions about my apartment, not listening to the answers. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Finally, when the plates were cleared, the theater ended. My father cleared his throat, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and folded his hands on the table. "So, Serafina," he began, his voice dropping an octave to sound authoritative. "As you know, the bank facility is coming up for its 2-year review. We are actually looking at a massive expansion phase. Calliope has some incredible strategies to capture the digital print market. We just need to restructure the capital stack." I looked at Calliope. "Restructure the capital stack?" I repeated. "What does that actually mean, Calliope?" She sat up, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "It means we are pivoting, Sarah. We are scaling up. We need liquidity to synergize our new client onboarding processes. It is basic economics." It was basic garbage. She had strung together buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. I turned my attention back to my father. "How much, Dad?" "Cut the corporate speak. What is the number the bank wants?" My mother rushed in, her voice softening into a dangerous whisper. "It is just a formality, honey. The bank just wants to see continuity. They're offering us $500,000. The number hit the room like a physical blow. $500,000. $500,000. I sat there, the invisible calculator in my brain instantly running the catastrophic math. A $500,000 personal guarantee does not just vanish. It would sit on my credit report like a massive anchor. It would destroy my debt-to-income ratio. It would follow me into every mortgage application, every background check my corporate firm ran on me. They wanted me to bet my entire financial existence on a failing business run by a sister who bought silk shirts while the ink suppliers were putting us on cash-only terms. "That is not a renewal," I said, my voice eerily calm. "That is a massive new liability. The original guarantee was $80,000. You are asking me to back $500,000. You make 6 figures, Serafina." Calliope snapped, dropping the business genius act. "You literally sit in an air-conditioned office looking at spreadsheets all day. We are out here doing the real work. The least you can do is sign a piece of paper so the family business does not go under." "If you are doing the real work, Calliope, why do you not sign the guarantee?" I asked, looking her dead in the eyes. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "I do not have the liquid assets right now. All my capital is tied up in lifestyle equity." Lifestyle equity. I almost laughed. You mean you spend every dime you steal from the company, I thought, but I held my tongue. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the printed email alert from the Credit Monitoring Bureau. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately, and slid it across the polished oak table toward my sister. Speaking of liquid assets, I said, watching her face. Someone tried to open a corporate card in my name last Tuesday. From the press's IP address. It was blocked because my credit is frozen. The silence in the dining room was deafening. Calliope's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of white. My father stared at the paper, then at Calliope, his jaw working but no words coming out. I had expected them to be horrified. I had expected my parents to scream at her for committing federal identity theft. Instead, my mother reached out, snatched the paper, and crumpled it in her fist. She glared at me, her eyes flashing with a terrifying, righteous anger. "Are you really going to make a federal case out of this at the dinner table, Serafina?" my mother hissed. "Your sister was just trying to find solutions. She was trying to be proactive because you are always so difficult to deal with. We are family. You do not nickel and dime family." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me. She was actively defending a felony because it was committed by her golden child. The floor beneath me felt like it was dropping away, but my mind was crystal clear. They did not see me as a daughter. I was just a walking, breathing credit score. "I am not signing anything tonight," I said, standing up from the table. "I need to look at the books. I will go to the press tonight and run the numbers myself. If the business is actually scaling, the ledgers will prove it." My father stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You do not need to audit us, Serafina. I am your father. And I am an auditor," I replied coldly, grabbing my coat. "I will see the books, or the bank sees nothing." I walked out the front door, leaving them shouting in the dining room. I knew they were panicking. Because when you demand $500,000 from a forensic accountant, you better pray your ledgers are clean. And I knew, deep in my bones, that my family's books were soaked in rot. I was about to find exactly where the bodies were buried. The drive from my parents' house to the industrial park was a blur of streetlights and rising adrenaline. It was near midnight when I pulled my car into the dark, empty parking lot of Vaughn and Daughter's Legacy Press. The massive corrugated metal building stood silent, casting a long, jagged shadow under the moonlight. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the heavy brass ring. 25 years later, the keys were worn smooth, but they still turned the heavy deadbolt perfectly. The lock clicked, echoing in the quiet night, and I pushed the steel door open. The smell hit me instantly. The familiar, suffocating mix of ozone, machine grease, and old paper. I did not turn on the main overhead lights. I navigated through the labyrinth of massive Heidelberg presses by the faint orange glow of the emergency exit signs. I made my way to the back, to the cramped administrative office where my father and Calliope supposedly ran their empire. I locked the office door behind me, closed the blinds tightly, and switched on the small desk lamp. A pool of harsh yellow light illuminated the absolute chaos of Calliope's workspace. There were unpaid invoices stacked haphazardly on top of fashion magazines. Coffee rings stained the edges of tax notices from the state. It was not the desk of a director of operations. It was the desk of a spoiled teenager playing business. I sat down, fired up the ancient desktop computer, and bypassed the hilariously simple password. I pulled up the primary accounting software. For the next 2 hours, the daughter vanished, and the forensic auditor took over. I moved through the digital ledgers with brutal efficiency. Line by line. Expense by expense. The numbers did not just tell a story of a struggling business. They screamed a story of a parasitic infection. Revenue was down 40% year over year. But what made my blood run cold were the expenses. The cost of raw materials, specifically bulk commercial paper, had skyrocketed by almost 300% in the last 10 months. Yet, the output of printed materials had dropped. You do not need to be a math genius to know that if you are buying 3 times as much paper but printing half as many books, the money is bleeding out somewhere else. I printed the vendor payment logs, my eyes scanning the payee names. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were being funneled to a single, newly added supplier, Gideon Paper Supply Company. The payments were being authorized directly by Calliope. I needed physical files. I turned away from the computer and began pulling open the heavy metal filing cabinets. Most were stuffed with outdated warranties, but the bottom drawer of my father's locked credenza caught my eye. I used a trick I learned years ago with a paperclip to pop the cheap lock. The drawer slid open, revealing a pristine, heavy manila folder labeled Estate Planning, Confidential. My fingers hesitated for a fraction of a second before I flipped it open. Inside was a freshly bound document from a high-priced estate attorney in town. Last will and testament of Vaughn and Loretta. Alongside it was a corporate succession document. I read the legal jargon, translating the cold print into the ultimate betrayal. Upon my parents' death, or in the event of their retirement, 100% of the voting shares of Vaughn and Daughter's Legacy Press were to be transferred to Calliope. Furthermore, the deed to the family home and all liquid assets were bequeathed entirely to her. My name appeared exactly once in the 30-page document, in a small clause near the end, stating, "To our daughter, Serafina, we leave the sum of $1, as she has established her own independent financial standing." I sat in the quiet office, the hum of the refrigerator in the break room suddenly sounding incredibly loud. Let the sheer, breathtaking audacity of this sink in. My parents had spent the evening begging, guilt-tripping, and demanding that I sign a $500,000 personal guarantee. They wanted me to risk my apartment, my career, and my entire financial future to secure a loan for a company. And in their private legal documents, they had meticulously ensured that I did not own a single, solitary percentage of that company. I was being asked to absorb 100% of the catastrophic risk for absolutely 0% of the equity. I was not a partner. I was a human sacrifice. I did not cry. Crying is what victims do when they feel helpless. I felt the exact opposite of helpless. I felt armed. I pulled out my phone and meticulously photographed every single page of the will, every page of the succession plan, and every vendor payment log to Gideon Paper Supply. The flash of my camera was the only light in the room, capturing the absolute rot of my family's legacy. Just as I was taking a picture of the final page, my heart stopped. Footsteps. Heavy, dragging footsteps echoing on the concrete floor outside the office. Someone else was in the building. I froze, my thumb hovering over the phone screen. The doorknob of the office began to turn slowly. It was locked, but the metal rattled aggressively. "I know you're in there," a gruff, tired voice called out through the wood. "I saw your car by the loading dock." It was not my father. It was not Calliope. I slipped the folder back into the drawer, pushed the lock shut, and walked over to the door. I took a deep breath, turned the deadbolt, and pulled it open. Standing in the dim light of the warehouse, holding a heavy flashlight, was Silas. Silas was the floor foreman. He had worked at the press since I was a little girl with scraped knees. He was a massive man with permanent ink stains on his calloused hands and a perpetual scowl. Earlier that evening, when I arrived in town, Silas had been the one to look at me with subtle disdain, heavily influenced by the narrative my parents spun about the greedy city daughter. But looking at him now, standing in the shadows of the machinery, he did not look angry. He looked utterly exhausted, broken down by a weight he could no longer carry. "Silas," I said, my voice steady, though my pulse was racing. "It is past midnight. What are you doing here?" He lowered the flashlight, staring at me with hollow, bloodshot eyes. He looked past me into the office, at the glowing computer screen and the stacks of ledgers I had pulled out. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped his chest. "You're finally looking, aren't you?" Silas muttered, stepping into the office and closing the door behind him. "It took you long enough, Serafina. I thought the smart city auditor would have caught the smell of rot months ago." I crossed my arms, leaning against the desk. "I am looking now, Silas. What do you know about Gideon Paper Supply?" The name seemed to physically age him. Silas slumped into the cheap guest chair, rubbing his face with his massive hands. When he looked up, the loyalty that had kept him tethered to my family for 30 years was completely gone. "Calliope is destroying this place," Silas said, his voice a low, furious gravel. 3 months ago, she fired our reliable paper vendor. Said they were too analog. She brought in this Gideon guy. The paper he sends. Serafina, it is absolute garbage. It is thin, it tears in the feeders, it jams the Heidelberg every damn shift. We are losing clients because the print quality looks like it was done in a basement. But she keeps ordering it. Massive pallets of it. And she pays him triple what the premium stock used to cost. I felt the tumblers of the lock falling into place in my mind. It's a kickback scheme, I stated, the realization solidifying into fact. She is overpaying a phantom vendor for trash materials, and he is funneling the excess cash back to her. Silas nodded grimly. He reached into the pocket of his heavy canvas jacket and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. He held it out to me like it was a live grenade. I caught her logged into the system on the main floor terminal last week, Silas explained, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. She forgot to log out of her private email. I am an old man, but I am not stupid. I read the threads. Gideon is her boyfriend's cousin. They have a whole percentage split worked out. She is using the kickback money to pay the lease on that fancy convertible and buy those silk shirts. When I confronted her, she laughed in my face. She told me if I breathed a word to your father, she would fire me and make sure I lost my company pension. She said no one would believe a grease monkey over the director of operations. I took the USB drive from his rough hand. It felt heavy with consequence. Silas had just handed me the weapon to destroy the golden child. Why are you giving this to me, Silas? Why not go to the police? Because your father would die of a heart attack if the cops showed up, Silas said bitterly. And because I know what they are planning to do to you at the party next week. I heard them talking in the break room. It makes me sick. The birthday party? I asked, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Silas pointed a thick finger toward a stack of unopened mail on the corner of Calliope's desk. Check the thick envelope from Hartwell Community Bank. The one she hid under the fashion magazines. I moved immediately. I dug under the glossy magazines and pulled out a heavy, pristine white envelope with the bank's logo. It had been carefully slit open at the top. I pulled out the contents. It was a commercial loan renewal and increase application. The amount requested was $500,000. But the chilling part was not the numbers. It was the guarantor section. The bank had pre-filled my full legal name, my social security number, and my address. There was a bright yellow sign here, tab pointing to the blank line at the bottom. And stuck directly to the front of the application was a hot pink sticky note, written in my mother's looping, elegant handwriting. The ink was dark blue, the letters perfectly formed. I read it out loud, my voice echoing in the small, silent office. Bring this to the party on Saturday. When the cake comes out, have Vaughn make a speech about family legacy in front of the whole town. Then hand her the pen. With the mayor and the pastor watching, she will not dare cause a scene. She will sign it to save face. I stared at the pink sticky note. They were not asking me. They had never intended to ask me. They were engineering a public psychological ambush. My mother, the woman who used to braid my hair, had calculated exactly how much social pressure it would take to force me to sign away my life. She was weaponizing my birthday, weaponizing the community, to trap me in a financial cage so her golden child could keep stealing from the family. I looked at Silas. The old man looked away, ashamed to even witness it. Thank you, Silas, I whispered, carefully putting the document, the sticky note, and the USB drive into my leather briefcase. What are you going to do? He asked, standing up heavily. I am going to let them throw me a party, I said, a cold, sharp smile touching the corners of my mouth. And then I am going to burn their legacy to the ground. The next 5 days were a masterclass in silent warfare. I did not return my mother's frantic phone calls. I did not text Calliope. I took a week of personal time off from my corporate job, locked the door to my city apartment, and turned my dining table into a war room. When you decide to destroy a financial trap, you do not use emotions, you use paper. And I had the best paper in the city. My first call on Monday morning was to Paul, my personal attorney. Paul is a shark in a tailored suit who specializes in corporate litigation and asset protection. I sat across from his massive mahogany desk and laid out the entire situation, the $80,000 expiring guarantee, the forged credit inquiry, the kickback scheme on the USB drive, the secret will, and the pink sticky note detailing the ambush. Paul looked at the evidence, took off his glasses, and rubbed his temples. "Serafina," he said, his voice grave, "your family is not just toxic. They are operating a criminal enterprise, and they are trying to make you the underwriter for their felonies." "I know," I replied, sipping the expensive sparkling water his assistant had provided. "I need you to lock down my fortress. When the hammer falls next week, I want absolute zero liability." We drafted a formal, legally binding letter of refusal. We addressed it directly to Mrs. Sterling, the Chief Risk Officer at Hartwell Community Bank. The letter was brutally clear. I, Serafina, formally declare that I will not renew, extend, or increase the existing credit facility for Vaughn and Daughters Legacy Press. Furthermore, any signature bearing my name on any future documents must be considered fraudulent and invalid unless executed in person, inside a bank branch, with Paul present. We sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested, and hand-delivered a copy to the bank manager. I had just driven a concrete wall between my name and their debt. Step 2 was liquidating my vulnerability. Over the years, I had banked at the same regional branch my family used. Not anymore. Within 48 hours, I withdrew every single cent of my savings, my checking, and my emergency funds. I moved my money to a national bank with 0 branches in my hometown. I changed all my passwords, instituted dual-factor authentication on every account, and renewed the hard freeze on my credit. My financial footprint in their world was completely erased. I was sitting on my couch on Thursday evening, reviewing the printed emails between Calliope and Gideon, feeling a grim satisfaction when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Aunt Beatrice. Aunt Beatrice is my father's older sister. She is a retired schoolteacher, a widow, and the only person in my family who ever remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding her. She lived in the small, charming Victorian house that my grandparents had built, a house she co-owned on paper with my father due to an old inheritance quirk. I answered the phone, expecting a warm birthday wish. Instead, I heard a trembling, terrified voice. "Serafina?" "Oh, thank God you answered," Beatrice choked out, suppressing a sob. "I am so sorry to bother you, honey, but I do not understand what is happening. I just got a certified letter from the bank." My blood ran cold. "What letter, Aunt B? What does it say?" "It is a notice of lien," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It says my house, the house I live in, has been put up as secondary collateral for a commercial bridge loan for the printing press. Serafina, Vaughn never told me. If the press defaults, they are going to take my home. I have nowhere else to go. Calliope said you were handling the new loan and everything would be fine. Are you handling it, sweetie?" I closed my eyes, the sheer magnitude of my family's depravity washing over me like ice water. The twisted puzzle was finally complete. They needed $500,000 to cover Calliope's theft and keep the business running. Because my signature was not enough collateral for a failing business, my father had secretly leveraged his partial ownership of Aunt Beatrice's home to secure the bridge loan, banking entirely on the fact that he could force me to sign the final guarantee at the party to clear it. If I walked away, the press would default, and the bank would foreclose on a 70-year-old widow to recoup the money my sister used to buy designer clothes. They were not just holding a gun to my head. They were holding a gun to the head of the only person in the family who actually loved me, daring me to pull the trigger. "Aunt B," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that I had never used before. "Listen to me very carefully. Do not call my father. Do not call Calliope. You pack a bag, and you drive to my apartment in the city right now. You are staying with me this weekend." "But the house," she cried. "They are not taking your house," I promised, standing up, the fury inside me burning away any lingering hesitation. "I am going to handle it. I am going to handle all of them." I hung up the phone. The sadness was gone. The hurt of being the unloved child was completely vaporized. All that was left was the cold, calculating wrath of a forensic auditor who held all the receipts. The birthday party was in 2 days. They had built a public stage to humiliate me into submission. But they forgot one crucial detail about setting a trap. You have to make sure the beast you are trying to cage is not smarter than you. Saturday arrived with a kind of bright, cloudless blue sky that makes small towns look like they belong on a postcard. I left my city apartment early in the afternoon, leaving Aunt Beatrice sitting comfortably in my sunlit living room with a cup of expensive herbal tea and a stack of romance novels. She had cried for the first 24 hours, mourning the betrayal of her own brother, but by Saturday morning, the tears had dried, replaced by a quiet, resolute anger. I told her to lock the door, order whatever she wanted for delivery, and turn off her phone. I was going to handle the monsters. The drive to Hartwell felt different this time. For the past 17 years, every trip back to this town had felt like driving with the parking brake engaged. There was always a knot of anxiety in my stomach, a heavy dread about what financial disaster I was going to have to untangle, or what passive-aggressive comment my mother was going to hurl at me. Today, the knot was gone. I felt lighter than air. I was not driving to a family obligation. I was driving to a demolition site, and my finger was hovering right over the detonator. When I pulled onto Main Street, I saw that my parents had gone entirely out of their minds. They had convinced the town council to block off the entire street directly in front of the massive brick facade of Vaughn and Daughter's Legacy Press. String lights were crisscrossing the road, hung from the old oak trees to the street lamps. A massive, professionally printed vinyl banner hung above the main doors. It read, in massive gold letters, celebrating 75 years of legacy, and happy 35th birthday, Serafina. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. They were inextricably linking my existence to the survival of the business, broadcasting it to the entire community. I parked a few blocks away and walked toward the barricades. Half the town was there. I saw the mayor, who always relied on my father for campaign donations back when the press was actually profitable. I saw the pastor from my mother's church, holding a paper plate stacked high with barbecue ribs. I saw dozens of press floor workers, looking uneasy in their weekend clothes, holding cheap plastic cups of beer. And right in the center of it all was my family. My mother, Loretta, was wearing a floral dress that screamed suburban matriarch. My father was in a tailored sports coat, shaking hands and slapping backs like he was running for governor. And then there was Calliope. My sister was holding court near the catering tent, wearing a backless designer silk dress that easily cost $3,000, paired with a gold Rolex watch that I knew for a fact was purchased 3 weeks ago with Gideon's kickback money. She was laughing loudly, tossing her hair, looking every bit the successful heiress of a booming empire. The moment my mother spotted me, the theater began. Oh, there she is. The birthday girl. The genius of the family. Loretta practically shrieked, parting the crowd and rushing toward me with her arms wide open. She pulled me into a suffocating hug, whispering furiously into my ear before she pulled away. Smile, Serafina. The mayor is watching. Do not embarrass us. She grabbed my wrist in a vice grip and paraded me through the crowd. People I had not spoken to since high school were suddenly wishing me a happy birthday, patting my shoulder, and telling me how lucky my parents were to have such a dedicated daughter looking out for the family legacy. It was intoxicatingly toxic. The entire town had been fed a narrative. In their eyes, I was the wealthy, successful city accountant who was graciously coming home to bless the family business with my limitless resources. Your father tells me you are helping them expand into the digital frontier, the mayor said, shaking my hand vigorously. We need this press to stay open, Serafina. It provides 50 jobs for our community. You are doing a noble thing. I looked the mayor in the eye, maintaining a perfectly pleasant, empty smile. I am always committed to doing the right thing for the numbers, Mr. Mayor. Calliope drifted over, handing me a glass of cheap champagne. Happy birthday, sis, she said, her eyes dead and cold despite the wide smile on her lips. Big night tonight. I hope you are ready to be a team player for once. I took the glass, but did not drink from it. I looked at the $3,000 dress she was wearing, bought with stolen money, bought with the blood of the business she was demanding I save. I am more ready than you could possibly imagine, Calliope, I replied smoothly. The sun began to set, painting the sky in deep purples and bruised oranges. The string lights flickered to life, casting a warm, deceptive glow over the crowd. The band stopped playing, and the low hum of chatter began to die down as my father stepped up to the small wooden stage they had built near the front doors of the press. He tapped the microphone. The sharp screech of feedback echoed off the brick buildings. It was time. The crowd gathered around the stage, completely silent, their faces turned upward toward my father. He stood there, looking distinguished, the perfect picture of a hard-working American businessman. He cleared his throat, adjusting his sports coat, and let the silence stretch just long enough to build anticipation. He was a natural performer, I will give him that. 75 years, Vaughn began, his voice booming through the cheap PA system, rich with engineered emotion. For 75 years, this family has kept the presses running. Through recessions, through hardships, through the changing of times. We have provided jobs, we have built community, and we have kept the Vaughn name synonymous with reliability. The crowd murmured in agreement. A few people clapped. But you cannot build a future by only looking at the past, he continued, gesturing broadly. To survive, you have to grow. You have to scale. And tonight, we are not just celebrating our history. We are securing our tomorrow. And we are doing it as a family. He turned his gaze directly toward me. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, leaving me standing in a small clearing, surrounded by 100 pairs of expectant eyes. Tonight is also a very special night because it is my eldest daughter's 35th birthday, he said, his voice dropping into a register of deep, manufactured affection. Serafina went off to the city. She became a big-shot corporate auditor. But she never forgot where she came from. She never forgot her blood. Serafina, come on up here, sweetheart. My mother appeared behind me, pressing her hands sharply into my lower back, physically pushing me forward. I walked slowly, my heels clicking rhythmically on the asphalt. I climbed the 3 wooden steps onto the stage and stood next to my father. From the side of the stage, my mother stepped forward, holding a polished silver tray. Resting on the tray was a thick stack of legal documents from Hartwell Community Bank. The $500,000 commercial loan agreement. Next to the papers rested a heavy, solid gold Mont Blanc fountain pen. My father put a heavy arm around my shoulder, squeezing tightly enough to bruise. He leaned into the microphone. To launch our new expansion, the bank requires a simple signature to restructure our capital. Serafina has graciously agreed to stand beside her family and underwrite our future. Let us give a massive round of applause for my brilliant daughter. The crowd erupted into cheers. People were whistling. The pastor was clapping enthusiastically. Calliope was standing in the front row, a triumphant, wicked smirk plastered across her face. They had done it. They had built the perfect trap. They had cornered me in front of everyone I knew, weaponizing social compliance. The psychology was brilliant. If I said no, I would not just be denying a loan. I would be destroying the town's beloved legacy, humiliating my parents, and ruining the 50 jobs the mayor had just guilted me about. I would be the ultimate villain. My mother held out the silver tray, her eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying, unspoken threat. Sign it. Sign it, or you will never show your face in this town again. I reached out slowly. My fingers wrapped around the cold, heavy metal of the gold fountain pen. The cheering began to die down, replaced by a breathless, expectant hush. The only sound was the hum of the warehouse generators in the background. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the workers who had no idea their paychecks were about to bounce because Calliope was buying designer silk. I saw the mayor who only cared about tax revenue. I saw my mother, breathless with greed. I saw my father, waiting for his human shield to fall into place. I held the pen over the paper. I could feel my father's grip on my shoulder relax, confident in his victory. Then I turned my hand. I let the gold pen slip from my fingers. It hit the silver tray with a sharp, metallic clatter that sounded like a gunshot over the microphone. The pen rolled off the tray and fell to the wooden stage, bouncing into the dark grass below. I leaned forward, grabbing the microphone from my father's hand. My voice was completely level, devoid of any anger, devoid of any sorrow. It was the voice of a forensic auditor delivering a final ruling. "I am not signing that document," I said. The words echoed off the brick walls of the press. For a second, nobody registered what had happened. It was so far outside their script that their brains simply rejected the audio. "I am not signing a $500,000 personal guarantee for a business that is financially bleeding to death," I continued, my voice ringing out clear and sharp. "I am not pledging my life savings, my home, or my future to cover up the gross financial mismanagement happening inside that building." The silence that fell over the street was absolute. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air right before a tornado touches down. The mayor's jaw literally dropped. The workers stared at me, their plastic cups frozen in midair. My mother's face went completely blank, the mask shattering into a million pieces. Calliope's smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated panic. My father grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh like claws. He pulled me away from the microphone, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, saliva flying from his lips. "You are embarrassing me. Sign the damn paper, Serafina." "The guarantee is fraudulent," I said loudly, stepping out of his grip. "And so is this party." The crowd began to murmur, a low, buzzing wave of confusion and shock rippling through the street. People were looking at each other, looking at the bank documents on the silver tray, and looking at the furious, panicked faces of my parents. The carefully constructed illusion of the Vaughn family legacy was burning down in real time, right in front of the entire town. Calliope scrambled up the steps of the stage, her $3,000 heels catching on the wood. She shoved her way past our mother and got right in my face. Her eyes were wild, darting around nervously. "You are crazy," Calliope shrieked, forgetting to lower her voice. The microphone picked up the edge of her hysteria. "She is having a mental breakdown. Do not listen to her. She has always been jealous of me, of the business. She is just trying to ruin my night." "Your night?" I asked, raising a single eyebrow. "The banner says it is my birthday, Calliope. But we all know that is just the bait." "I saw the books, Calliope. I saw the Gideon paper supply invoices. Did you really think I would not look before you asked me to sign away $500,000? The color drained from Calliope's face so fast I thought she was going to faint. She stumbled backward, bumping into the silver tray, knocking the bank documents onto the floor. The papers scattered in the wind, blowing across the stage like trash. My father snapped. The fear of losing the business, the humiliation of being defied in public, and the realization that his scapegoat had just broken her chains all collided in his chest, creating an explosion of pure, toxic rage. He did not care about the mayor anymore. He did not care about the pastor. He stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides, shaking with a fury so deep it seemed to vibrate the air around him. He looked straight into my eyes. The man who had given me life, the man who had handed me the keys to his empire when I was 10 years old so he could sleep in, looked at me with absolute, unfiltered hatred. He leaned in close, his voice a low, terrifying roar that tore from his throat. "You are dead to me." The words hung in the air. The crowd gasped. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with both hands. The silence that followed was suffocating. He had expected those words to destroy me. He had expected me to collapse, to beg for his forgiveness, to scramble to my knees and sign the papers just to win back the conditional love of a monster. People always say that in moments of ultimate betrayal, something inside you shatters. But that is not what happened to me. Nothing shattered. Something closed. Quietly, cleanly, and completely. It was the sound of a ledger closing at the end of a long, miserable fiscal year. The account of the Vaughn family was finally reconciled. The balance was zero. There was nothing left to owe and nothing left to pay. I did not cry. I did not scream back. The utter lack of reaction on my face seemed to unnerve him more than if I had slapped him. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out the heavy brass ring. The 6 jagged keys clinking together was the only sound on the stage. I held them up for a brief second, letting the light catch the worn metal. The keys to the front door, the loading dock, the back office, the petty cash safe. The physical manifestation of 25 years of unpaid, invisible labor. I tossed the keys. They hit my father square in the chest and dropped to the wooden floorboards, landing right on top of the scattered bank documents. "Then the dead cannot sign your contracts," I said. I turned my back on him, on my mother, and on my sister. I walked down the wooden steps. The crowd parted for me immediately, wide-eyed and silent, moving out of my way as if I were carrying a live bomb. I walked down the center of the street, under the string lights, past the barbecue, and past the massive, hypocritical banner. Nobody followed me. Nobody tried to stop me. As I reached the corner of the block, the spell broke behind me. I heard my mother start to wail, a loud, dramatic sound trying to reclaim the victim narrative. I heard my father yelling for the band to start playing again. And faintly, cutting through the chaos, I heard Calliope screaming into her cell phone, frantically trying to reach her contact at the bank, desperately trying to find a way to stop the bleeding before Monday morning. But I knew something she did not. The bank's automated systems do not answer their phones on Saturday night. And by the time the sun rose on Monday, the Vaughn family empire would already be reduced to ash. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove out of the town limits. I did not check my rearview mirror once. The drive back to the city was the most peaceful 45 minutes of my entire life. Monday morning broke over the city with a crisp, cool breeze. I woke up at 7, made myself an espresso, and sat on my balcony, looking out over the skyline. Aunt Beatrice was still asleep in the guest room. My phone, which I had powered back on, showed 83 missed calls and 47 text messages. Most of them were from my mother, oscillating wildly between vicious, venomous curses and desperate, weeping apologies. Several were from Calliope, alternating between threats to sue me for defamation and pathetic begging for a short-term personal loan. I deleted all of them without reading past the previews. While I was sipping my coffee, the financial apocalypse was landing in Hartwell. I knew exactly how the timeline would play out because I had designed it. At 9 in the morning, the bank's automated system triggered the maturity clause on the original $80,000 credit facility. Because the renewal application was missing a qualified guarantor, and because I had formally revoked my status on the account via certified legal mail, the system automatically converted the debt to immediate default status. At 9:15, the bank servers initiated a hard freeze on all operating accounts linked to Vaughn and Daughter's legacy press. Every single cent of liquidity was locked. At 10 o'clock, the Monday morning supply trucks arrived at the press loading dock. When Calliope tried to swipe the corporate card to pay for the week's ink insolvents, the terminal flashed a bright red declined. The drivers, who had already been dealing with late payments for months, refused to unload the cargo and drove away. At noon, the biweekly payroll checks for the 50 employees were processed by the third-party accounting software. Every single one of them bounced. By 1 in the afternoon, the press floor was in open mutiny. Silas, keeping true to our unspoken alliance, led a walkout. The massive Heidelberg machines were shut down. The roaring heart of the family legacy went completely, terrifyingly silent. At 2 o'clock, my phone rang. The caller ID was not my family. It was a direct line from Hartwell Community Bank. I answered on the second ring. "This is Serafina," I said crisply. "Ms. Vaughn, this is Eleanor Sterling, Chief Risk Officer at Hartwell." The voice on the other end was tight, professional, and dripping with urgency. "We are currently dealing with a critical default situation regarding the commercial facility for the printing press. Your parents and your sister are currently sitting in my boardroom. They are claiming that the failure to renew was an administrative error on your part and that you will be arriving shortly to sign the documents." I smiled into the phone. The sheer, pathological delusion of my family was almost impressive. Even as the building burned down around them, they were still trying to lie to the fire department. "Mrs. Sterling, as you are aware from the certified letter my attorney delivered to your desk last week, there is no administrative error," I replied calmly. "I have no intention of signing any documents. However, as I am technically still named on the expired facility that went into default this morning, I am legally entitled to be present for the restructuring or liquidation discussions." There was a slight pause on the line. That is correct. Are you willing to come in? I will be there in exactly 1 hour, I said. And Mrs. Sterling? I strongly suggest you ask your fraud department to pull the vendor payment history for an entity called Gideon Paper Supply before I arrive. You are going to want to look at those routing numbers. I hung up the phone. I walked to the guest room and knocked gently. Aunt Beatrice was sitting up reading. Get dressed, Aunt Bee, I said, handing her a folder. We have a meeting at the bank. It is time to get your house back. I put on my sharpest navy blue suit, the one I wear when I testify in federal court against embezzling executives. I packed my leather briefcase with the printed emails, the USB drive, the photos of the secret will, and the deed records to Aunt Beatrice's house. I was not going to the bank to negotiate. I was going to perform an autopsy. The boardroom at Hartwell Community Bank was a fishbowl of frosted glass and brushed steel. The air conditioning was turned down so low it felt like a meat locker. When I walked through the double glass doors, followed closely by Aunt Beatrice, the temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. My family was sitting on one side of the massive mahogany table. My father looked like he had aged a decade since Saturday night. His face was gray, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. My mother was nervously shredding a paper napkin in her lap. Calliope was vibrating with nervous energy, her leg bouncing furiously under the table, her fingernails bitten down to the quick. When they saw Aunt Beatrice walk in with me, the confusion on their faces was priceless. They had assumed she was sitting clueless in her Victorian house. The realization that I had intercepted their collateral hostage visibly shook my father. Sitting at the head of the table was Eleanor Sterling. She had two massive, red-flagged folders resting in front of her. She looked up at me, giving a sharp, professional nod. Ms. Vaughn. Thank you for joining us, Sterling said. She did not ask us to sit, but I pulled out a chair for Aunt Beatrice and took the one next to her. I placed my leather briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. Let us dispense with the pleasantries, Sterling began, her voice cutting through the silent room like a scalpel. As of 9 this morning, the commercial facility for Vaughn and Daughters Legacy Press is in critical default. The balance of $80,000 is due immediately. Furthermore, the application for the $500,000 expansion has been formally denied. This is ridiculous. Calliope burst out, slamming her hand on the table. My sister is just throwing a temper tantrum. She makes 6 figures. She can cover the guarantee. Just give us the papers, I will get her to sign them. Sterling stared at Calliope with the kind of absolute disdain usually reserved for insects. Ms. Vaughn, even if your sister were willing to sign the guarantee today, the bank would reject the application. During our mandatory underwriting review, which was accelerated this morning per Ms. Serafina's suggestion, our fraud department uncovered a massive discrepancy. Sterling opened one of the red folders. Over the last 10 months, over $120,000 has been wired to an unverified vendor named Gideon Paper Supply. We traced the receiving account. It is a Shell LLC registered to a residential address. The secondary signer on that receiving account is you, Calliope. The silence in the glass room was total. My mother stopped shredding the napkin. My father turned his head, extremely slowly, to look at his golden child. Calliope, my father whispered, his voice cracking. What is she talking about? You said the paper costs went up because of supply chain issues. Calliope shrank back into her expensive leather chair. It is a mistake. The bank made a mistake. Serafina set me up. She manipulated the software. I did not say a word. I just snapped open the locks on my briefcase, pulled out the printed email threads provided by Silas, and slid them across the polished wood table to my father. Vaughn picked up the papers with trembling hands. He read Calliope's own words, negotiating the kickback percentages with Gideon, bragging about how stupid the old man was, planning her next luxury car lease. He dropped the papers as if they were literally on fire. The illusion of his brilliant, capable successor shattered into dust right in front of him. You stole from the press, Vaughn choked out, clutching his chest. You stole from me. Oh, it gets infinitely worse, Dad, I finally spoke, my voice cold and loud in the sterile room. I turned to Mrs. Sterling. Let us talk about the collateral on the bridge loan. Sterling flipped a page in her folder. To cover the operating deficits caused by the missing funds, Von initiated a secondary bridge loan last month. The collateral pledged was a residential property co-owned by Von and Beatrice Von. Aunt Beatrice stood up. Despite her small frame, she radiated the righteous fury of a betrayed sister. She reached into her purse and threw a legal injunction onto the table. "You tried to steal my home," Beatrice said, her voice shaking with anger, not tears. "The home our parents built. You forged my consent on the preliminary appraisal documents. My attorney filed an injunction this morning. That house is locked in a legal dispute. The bank cannot touch it, and you cannot use it." Sterling nodded slowly. "The bank has received the injunction. The collateral is invalid. The bridge loan is instantly recalled." My father put his head down on the table, burying his face in his arms. He was a ruined man. His legacy was dead. His golden child was a thief. And his scapegoat was holding the axe. Calliope, however, was like a trapped rat. She realized the walls were closing in, and her desperation overrode any remaining logic. She leaned forward, her eyes wild, aiming a frantic whisper at our parents. "Listen, it is fine. We just let the bank take the building. We declare bankruptcy. And if something were to happen to the machinery, an electrical fire or something, the insurance policy covers full replacement value. We could just—" "I am going to stop you right there, Calliope," I interrupted, my voice slicing through the air. "Do not even finish that sentence. Because if you are thinking about committing arson for an insurance payout, you are a few hours too late." Calliope froze. "When I audited the books last week, I noticed the massive spike in the commercial property insurance premiums you authorized," I explained, leaning back in my chair, enjoying the absolute terror blooming on her face. "So, on Friday, I made an anonymous call to the State Insurance Fraud Investigator's Office. I told them there was a high risk of an orchestrated total loss event at the press. They sent a tactical inspection team into the warehouse at 6 o'clock this morning. They have documented every wire, every chemical storage barrel, and every fire exit. If so much as a spark goes off in that building, the federal government will charge you with domestic terrorism and insurance fraud before the ashes even cool." Calliope let out a pathetic, strangled sound, like a dying animal. She slumped back in her chair, covering her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. My mother, who had been completely silent the entire time, finally looked at me. There was no anger left in her eyes. Only fear. She looked at me like I was a stranger. Like I was a monster. "Serafina," Loretta whispered. "Why are you doing this to us? We are your family." I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. I looked down at the people who had treated me like a human ATM, who had planned to publicly humiliate me, who had tried to leave me with $500,000 of debt while secretly leaving everything they owned to the sister who was robbing them blind. "You are not my family," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "You are just a bad investment. And as an auditor, my job is to cut the losses." I turned to Mrs. Sterling, giving her a polite nod. "The guarantee is expired. My liability is zero. I leave the liquidation of their assets in your capable hands. Good day." I walked out of the glass courtroom, Aunt Beatrice right by my side. Behind us, the sounds of my father weeping and Calliope hyperventilating echoed in the sterile bank, a symphony of consequences finally coming due. It has been 6 months since that Monday morning in the bank. The fall of the Von family empire was neither quick nor quiet. It was a slow, agonizing public spectacle. Hartwell Community Bank did not hesitate. They seized the commercial property immediately. The massive corrugated metal building, the heart of my father's 75-year legacy, was chained up and padlocked. A few weeks later, a massive industrial auction house came in and liquidated everything. The giant Heidelberg presses, the very machines I used to clean the grease off of when I was 10 years old, were sold off for pennies on the dollar to a rival printing company 3 states away. The building itself was bought by a real estate developer who gutted the interior and turned it into a massive, soulless corporate storage facility. The smell of ink and ozone is permanently gone. Calliope's brilliant plan to survive her embezzlement fell apart the second the bank filed a formal police report regarding the fraudulent vendor scheme. Gideon, the paper supplier who was supposed to be her partner in crime, flipped on her the moment the federal investigators knocked on his door. He handed over every text message, every bank routing number, and every piece of evidence they needed to secure a plea deal for himself. Calliope was indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, commercial embezzlement, and conspiracy. She is currently awaiting trial, her designer silk dresses replaced by a very unflattering assigned wardrobe. The public defender assigned to her case says she will likely serve 3 to 5 years in federal prison. My parents lost everything. Because the business was organized as an old-school partnership rather than a shielded LLC, their personal assets were entirely exposed to the debt liquidation process. The bank foreclosed on their massive suburban home to cover the remaining deficit. All the equity my father thought he had, all the money he planned to leave exclusively to Calliope in that secret will, evaporated into thin air to pay the legal fees and bank penalties. They are currently renting a tiny, cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the town. My mother had to take a job working the cash register at a local pharmacy, ringing up the very people who used to attend her lavish backyard parties. Aunt Beatrice is perfectly fine. Thanks to the legal injunction Paul filed, and the fact that my father's fraudulent attempt to leverage her collateral was exposed, her Victorian house remains entirely hers. I paid the legal fees to have the ownership structure completely severed, ensuring my father can never touch her property again. She spends her days gardening and baking, entirely unbothered by the chaos surrounding her brother. As for me, the silence I found after throwing those keys on the stage has only grown deeper and more beautiful. I received a massive promotion at my firm, moving up to Senior Director of Compliance. I bought a new, larger apartment in the city, one with a guest room that Aunt Beatrice visits frequently. A few weeks ago, I received a plain white envelope in the mail. It was a letter from my father. It was written on cheap, lined notebook paper, a far cry from the heavy, customized corporate letterhead he used to use. It was short. Just a few lines apologizing for losing his temper at the party, asking if I could find it in my heart to let bygones be bygones, and mentioning how much they were struggling with the rent on their new apartment. There was no mention of the $500,000 trap, no mention of the secret will, and no mention of the fact that he told me I was dead to him. It was just a pathetic attempt to re-establish the connection to the one person who actually had money. I did not write back. I did not call. I took the letter, walked over to my home office, and fed it directly into the crosscut paper shredder. I watched the words turn into tiny, illegible strips of confetti. For 35 years, I believed that love meant carrying the burdens of the people who shared your blood. I believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I balanced the books perfectly enough, if I saved them from disaster enough times, they would eventually see me. They would eventually value me. But I learned the hardest lesson an invisible child can learn. People who use you as a shield do not care what happens to the shield when the arrows start flying. They only care that they do not get hit. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply step out of the way and let the arrows hit their intended target. I stopped being their shield, and I finally became my own person. If my story resonated with you, if you are the scapegoat, the invisible child, or the person who is always expected to fix the unfixable, remember this. No is a complete sentence. You do not owe your future to the people who refuse to protect your past. The moment you stop financing their dysfunction, you start building your own freedom. So, I have a question for all of you watching. If you received that letter from the father who screamed, "You are dead to me," in front of your entire town, just because he is now broke and living in a tiny apartment, would you ever consider replying? Or would you let the shredder do the talking? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to hear more stories of people finally taking their power back and setting boundaries that stick, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a dramatic update. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.